Hello, my name is Clement Fung. I'm a PhD student at Carnegie Mellon University, and today, on behalf of myself and my collaborators, I'll be presenting some new perspectives from a comprehensive evaluation of reconstruction-based anomaly detection in industrial control systems. Industrial control systems govern vital infrastructure in our everyday lives. Use cases include water treatment, the electric power grid, and chemical processes. Industrial control systems are also common targets for attack. Recent examples, such as an attack on a German steel mill, attacks on the Ukrainian power grid, and the spread of the Triton ICS malware, show that these attacks are also feasible in practice. Additionally, the number of vulnerabilities seen in ICS continue to increase year after year, so the importance of securing these ICS from attackers is increasing. A common approach to detect attacks in ICS is to use machine learning-based ICS anomaly detection. A machine learning model learns the ICS behavior and determines whether or not the behavior looks anomalous or not. In doing so, it raises an alarm if the behavior is anomalous. In this work, we ask, what are the best models for ICS anomaly detection, and what are the best ways to train them? In our work, we focus on a common instantiation of machine learning-based anomaly detection, reconstruction-based anomaly detection. An ICS is modeled through its system states, and a machine learning model learns from collections of these system states. Each state xt is a reading of all the sensor and actuator values in the industrial control system at a time t. Since anomalous data itself is rare, unsupervised learning is used as the preferred approach. Instead of directly predicting if an anomaly is occurring or not, the machine learning model takes a historical sequence of ICS states and predicts what the future ICS state should look like. This state is then compared to the next observed state, and a mean squared error, or an MSE, is computed. Minimizing the MSE over a training dataset is used as the objective while training. At test time, when a new sequence of data is fed to the machine learning model, the same reconstruction occurs and is compared with a new state at test time. The MSE is again calculated, and a threshold is applied to this MSE. If the MSE exceeds this threshold, an alarm is raised. There's been a variety of prior work that explores industrial control system anomaly detection with different datasets, architectures, and techniques. However, it's unclear what methods are actually best because of the variety of methods used in prior work. Prior work uses different datasets, such as SWAT, WADI, and Bodadal, different water distribution and water treatment datasets. Prior work uses different architectures, such as autoencoders, CNNs, and LSTMs, a variety of deep learning-based architectures. And prior work uses different techniques, such as early stopping while training or feature cleaning while processing the data. Prior work also explores over a variety of model hyperparameters and different thresholding values when declaring anomalies. With such a vast range of methods and techniques explored in prior work, it's difficult to make comparisons between prior work and know what models and what architectures are optimal because of this inconsistent methodology. To illustrate this inconsistency, I'll show you three findings from three different studies on the same dataset. Here, study A study from prior work on the SWAT dataset, would tell you that an 8-layer, 32-unit CNN is the best model. Study B on the same dataset would tell you that a 4-layer, 512-unit LSTM is best. And study C would tell you that a 1-layer autoencoder is the best. All of these studies have the same objective, ICS anomaly detection, and are trained on the same dataset. Yet they come to very different conclusions. This is because of the inconsistent methodology between these studies. It can be very confusing for a practitioner to know which model to adopt when applying anomaly detection to their own system. Thus, our contributions today are firstly, to evaluate across what has been proposed in prior work in ICS anomaly detection across different datasets, model architectures, and hyperparameters explored in prior work, and establish a common methodology to fairly compare across this work. In doing so, we identify 4 key techniques and methods needed for reproducible and correct evaluation. In the second half of our talk, we describe the need for different ICS anomaly detection metrics, I'll explain why we should stop using the point F1 score, a commonly used metric in prior work, and instead to use range-based metrics for better tuning and optimization of anomaly detection models. So for the first part of our talk, we ask, what models are best for ICS anomaly detection? Before comparing across prior work, we have to establish a common methodology. Our methodology is composed of 4 broad steps. First, we collect and pre-process an ICS dataset. In our work, we study the SWOT, WADI, and Baudadol datasets. These are all datasets that are publicly available in the water treatment and distribution industries. Second, we train an unsupervised machine learning model. We explore autoencoders, CNNs, and LSTMs over a variety of layers, units, history values, and compression factors shown on the slide here. Third, we tune the threshold for declaring anomalies or not. Threshold is parameterized by the value tau, which tells you if this value is exceeded to declare an alarm, and the window length W, which tells you how many consecutive alarms are needed before this is classified as an anomaly. There's a slight distinction between the window length W and the history described before. The history is the size of time used as the input to the model, whereas W is used after the model makes predictions to declare an anomaly or not. When tuning our threshold, the objective here is to maximize the point F1 score. This is the commonly used approach in prior work, and later in the second half of our talk, we'll tell you why different approaches, such as maximizing for different metrics, is preferred. Last, we evaluate against attacks at test time. These attacks are provided with the datasets in public work, and we report the final point F1 score, similar to most of what prior work does, taking the average over 3 random seeds. As mentioned before, there are 4 key techniques in this methodology, which are needed for both correct and reproducible evaluation. I won't go into the details of these techniques today, but for more details and the impacts of these techniques, you should see our paper for additional details. So now we ask, is there a best model? In exploring across autoencoders, CNNs, and LSTMs, we perform the entire training, tuning, and evaluation steps and report the final point F1 score. Here on the box plot, values to the right, where the point F1 is 1, is better. So to the right, higher is better. We evaluate across the 3 architectures for Baudadol and report all the different values for all different model hyperparameter values in the box plot here. We find that autoencoders perform the best on the Baudadol dataset. On average and across all models, the best performing model is an autoencoder. For SWOT, we find similar. The best performing model across what has been evaluated is also an autoencoder. For WADI, this finding is also the same. On average and across what's been explored, the best performing model is an autoencoder. However, autoencoders show a wide variance in their point F1 values, and we didn't find any stable or consistent trends across hyperparameter settings when evaluating autoencoders. So although autoencoders can achieve the best performance on all 3 datasets, the variance of their point F1 score is very high. I'm going to point out 2 additional findings from this study. First, when considering the CNNs and LSTMs trained on the SWOT and WADI datasets, many of them report point F1 scores that are very similar to one another. Models perform very similarly across model hyperparameters for these 2 datasets, regardless of whether the model is very, very small or very, very large. This is contrary to prior findings, which suggest that very large models are needed to perform well in these datasets. Secondly, we took 3 best performing architectures from prior work and included them in our evaluation, reproduced with our methodology. In the end, the final point F1 scores observed are well within the range of the hyperparameter settings we also evaluated. Next, I'll ask, how important is model hyperparameter tuning? For this next part, I will focus specifically on CNNs trained on the SWOT dataset. Here, the bar graph shows the final point F1 score for every single SWOT model hyperparameter setting for the CNNs, with a varying number of layer sizes and number of units per layer. Both the smallest model explored, a 1-layer CNN with 4 units per layer, and the largest model explored, a 5-layer 256-unit CNN, report very similar F1 scores. In fact, across all different layer and unit settings, the F1 scores are very similar. Thus, we come to the conclusion that model hyperparameter tuning on these datasets have a very limited impact on the overall performance. There are limits to this, however. We also explored with linear models and found that deep learning models did outperform them on these datasets. Now, I'll move on to the second part of our talk, where I discuss how range-based metrics affect the overall tuning and optimization of ICS anomaly detection models. Let me discuss the point F1. It's a commonly used metric in ICS anomaly detection, which is the average between the precision and recall computed over each instance in time. However, for our use case, attacks and predictions are actually performed in segments. I'll illustrate why the point F1 isn't a good match with this synthetic example. On the top, the red bars correspond to points in time where an attack is occurring. And on the bottom, the black bars indicate points in time where a hypothetical anomaly detection model predicts that an anomaly is occurring. So, in this first case, both attacks are partially detected by the anomaly detection model. Let me present an alternate case with the same attacks, except in this case, the first attack is completely missed, and the second attack is fully detected. When considering the time steps that underlay these predictions and computing the point F1 with every time step individually, the resulting point F1 scores are the same. Both cases show a point F1 score of 0.75. Even though these cases have the same point F1 score, the outcomes themselves are very different. The point F1 doesn't capture segment-based objectives effectively. So what other objectives might be important in a time series anomaly detection setting? Is it more important to detect every attack, as shown by the example on the left? Or is it more important to detect all of a single attack, as shown by the example on the right? When considering this trade-off, detected segments as opposed to detected time steps, we use the time-aware precision and recall metric. This is a metric proposed in prior work, but not yet applied to ICS themselves. Another important consideration would be whether or not attacks should be detected immediately, or whether later detections are still acceptable. In practice, it might be important to detect an attack as soon as possible, as this gives practitioners the most amount of time to immediately react to the attack once detected. Detecting attacks earlier can be captured by the Numenta metric. This is another metric that has been applied in anomaly detection settings, but not yet applied to ICS. So we revisit the methodology proposed in the first part of our talk, but instead modify the methodology in two ways. First, when tuning the threshold for declaring alarms, instead of maximizing for the point F1 score, we instead maximize for different metrics, such as the range F1 or the Numenta. Results are not shown in this talk, but we find in our work that by providing a metric that is tuned for different objectives, such as high precision or high recall, the eventual outcome, detection outcome, matches the metric provided. Next, we also use range-based metrics when reporting the final performance overall. So after tuning the models with the range-based metric, we also see how range-based metrics provide a different view of what is optimal. We report objectives such as the attack precision, the attack recall, and early detection, as well as the range F1 itself. To illustrate this, we'll use the examples from the Bonnedal dataset from before. Here on the left, I show the point F1 scores for each of the architectures, autoencoders, CNNs, and LSTMs. On the right now, we repeat the same experiments, but report the final range F1 scores for the same model architectures. When using the point F1 score, you would find that a two-layer autoencoder is the best performing model. However, when using the range F1 score instead, you would now find that a one-layer CNN is the best performing model. In fact, for every combination of both dataset and architectures, when selecting an optimal model with the point F1 or the range F1, the optimal model always changes. The range F1 gives a different view of what is optimal compared to the point F1. To illustrate this even further, I'll use the example of CNNs on the Bonnedal dataset. When using the point F1, Bonnedal CNNs are seen to perform very poorly. Most of the CNNs have a point F1 score of below 0.5. However, when using the range F1 score, many Bonnedal CNNs actually perform very well. Over a quarter of them have perfect range F1. This means that they detect every single attack and don't report any false alarms at all. Overall, compared to point F1, range-based metrics provide a different view of what is optimal. Most prior work uses the pointf1 score to declare what is optimal, but as we've seen, range-based metrics actually provide a very different view and end up resulting in ultimate different selections. In summary, we asked, what are the best models for ICS anomaly detection? In doing so, we established a common methodology for fair comparison across solutions proposed in prior work. In doing so, we identified 4 key pre-processing and training techniques needed for correct and reproducible evaluation, and found that small models are just as effective as large models for the datasets used in prior work. We also found that pointf1 is unfit for time series data, and showed that with representative examples. Instead, range-based metrics provide a better measure of how useful ICS anomaly detection models actually are. Our code is made available for your own experiments. Thank you very much for your time.